you're having more and more galvanizing. It's been a year, but we're continuing to be galvanized. We're continue to be horrified by the images, the video, the spectacle that is coming out of Gaza, as well as just, and to take the geopolitical dangers of all this, but just the moral horror. This picture of that young man who was burned alive in the hospital where he was a patient at is becoming, I've heard this said a number of times now, is becoming similar to the photo out of Vietnam of the young girl who had been burned with napalm.
Right.
It is becoming a rallying type of, or an iconic, and that may push more nations, or at least their parliamentarians, to do things that their executives are against. So I think maybe you would possibly see a movement within a parliament like Spain's or of Ireland to do something independent of the EU. And I mean, this is how these things happen, Judge. It all takes time. One nation has to lead and others start to follow. Things will occur. The International Court of Justice will eventually find Israel guilty of genocide. I'm confident of that. Will the International Criminal Court ever issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant? I don't know. I'm not so confident of that because they're more susceptible to pressure from the Americans than the ICJ is. But these things happen in time and they happen step by step. And whatever we can do to support people like that Spanish parliamentarian to continue their efforts. And I think the way you look at this is you look at this in the sense of the collapse of the South African regime in the 1980s and how that began decades before. The pressure on South Africa lasts for decades, and it's a slow, gradual, rolling process. And even when most of the world was sanctioning and blockading South Africa, the Americans stood with South Africa for years. For years, we stood with South Africa. And I think that will be the example that we can look to. We don't want to misuse history, right? But certainly, I think that's the example we look to as to potentially how something eventually changes in Israel. I want to go back to what I said before about Israel and the Palestinians, and my comments are really geared next 1, 2, 3 years. But long term, certainly, I agree with everyone else that this is untenable for Israel. But I think they've got 10 or 15 years of American support behind them at least.